the UK system is a bit different. The UK assumes less compatibility with rapid change than the US does. The US, you can elect anyone to be the executive with no run-up. They can just be the executive, and they can make a lot of changes as the executive. It's a more volatile system, changes more quickly. In the UK, it's much slower, so we get lower valleys, supposedly. Things get worse slower, but they also get better slower. You should expect that. The idea from that you're saying that because Truss was removed, and that because Sunak isn't doing anything useful, and because they aren't the ones that hold the real power, that therefore nothing will ever change. It will just take longer. But the wind is already heading in that direction. And in the UK, it may take more than merely voting, because we do have a progress to get through the halls of power. But I have no doubt it will happen. We actually kicked this off with Brexit, this whole sort of populist right-wing rebellion. Other people may suggest other definitions, but I think that's the one that makes sense. And then Trump happened straight afterwards. So it will happen. Any objection to it is inevitably going to be temporary, because this is the way the winds of change are blowing. I'm not sure the Conservatives do lie every election. Now, don't get me wrong, I am no fan of the Tories, but I think there is more to it. From what I've seen, I think that what's his name, Sunak, and the people around him actually did want to try the Rwanda thing. They actually tried, and I think they were blocked. I think the problem is that some of the innovations, shall we say, added on to the British political system are hamstringing the power of the very few people who actually sometimes do want to implement good policies. Even Sunak, about whom I have great doubt, I think actually has good intentions in some areas. He voted Brexit voluntarily back when no one else was. So he's not all bad. I think they wanted to give that Rwanda thing a go. Now, the Rwanda thing is a fucking drop in the bucket. It's a little experiment, but even that is being blocked. And I think it's mostly because of the European Court of Human Rights. Now, it sounds like a good thing, human rights. The problem is that it protects the wrong people. I haven't looked into this deeply, but from what I understand, you basically have to fully process the asylum application of every individual, and you have to house the people you're processing. You cannot deport without going through infinite hoops, and all of this is instantiated with a arbitrarily created Supreme Court, which was added onto our political system in 1987 by Tony Blair, which frankly does not belong. Now, I agree that the UK does not have a firmly instantiated method to prevent tyranny of the majority. It has softly instantiated methods, but it's the political system that has worked in this country for 800 years, roughly. Obviously, it's been gradually developing since then, but for a very long time, for longer than the US has existed. And so adding that on, I think, was a very bad idea, especially when it's informed by the EU courts, who, as we know, are themselves very biased. We should divest ourselves completely of European policy. We can do human rights ourselves if we want to, but let's build them on what we actually need and abandon the things that are not working. I think perhaps the issue is that the assumption of our system is it's actually very simple. You have just a room full of the people that make the decisions. Each one represents a region, and that's about it. Whoever is the most powerful group, that person forms a government. It's that simple. Obviously, there are other elements to it. There's the House of Lords and there's the monarchy, but they're not really primary legislators. The primary legislature is very simplistic. The American system is more arbitrated, and there's more steps, there's more stages. And that works for them, that's fine. But in our system, it is, in my opinion, paramount that the parliament actually have the highest authority. That can lead to problems, I agree, but I think it's worse not to do it that way. If you add in a Supreme Court like that, then whoever writes those policies owns the country. I believe that's what's happened. That is, I suspect, the reason that things are still not going well here, the reason it still seems like the Conservatives are saying we'll deal with immigration and then not doing it. I suspect that's the reason that even Priti Patel, who we were all very confident in several years ago and then did basically nothing, that's probably the reason that happened. Because they aren't allowed to. There's an assumption here that when you become Prime Minister, you have the power. I don't think you ultimately do. I'm not even sure if they have the permission, if they have the power to remove those European standards. I don't know exactly how that works. It's not a problem of the will. It's not a problem of the winds of power the winds of change cannot blow. It's not a problem of these things are unsolvable. It's just a problem of right time, right place, right people, right will. And we're getting there. Things are changing, even here, where things are supposed to change slowly. I think removing the all-European policy from our nation, all of it gone, completely gone, and then putting term limits on anyone involved in government of 10 years, that might just solve it all straight away. That might just rid these issues in 2 basic steps. Yes, it obviously would be hard to do, but it's simple in concept. I think if you did that, it would make a huge positive difference. Even if you kept the Supreme Court, just remove the European standards that drive it, but I think probably also remove the Supreme Court. I would like to come up with a way, in fact, if anyone has any suggestions, I'm very open to it, a way to have the UK system, not to just replace it with a different one, but to have the UK system, whilst also creating stronger protections against tyranny of the majority. I did have an idea, actually, I'd like to tell you. What you have is, and this is just an idea, I haven't tested it greatly, but I want to know what you think. Parliament is formed not just of the regions of the country, but also of interest groups. People can organize into interest groups, i.e. parties. Those parties, unlike the regions, the parties do not have to be elected first past the post. But there is a logarithmic curve in how many of them are elected, and they are not as numerous as the regional elected people. Because the whole idea of regions is that it's assumed that each region is its own government sort of its own self-governing area to some extent, and that they will have very similar interests to each other. That's been a fair assumption for almost all of our nation's history. But I don't think it really is anymore. What with rapid communication, culture is no longer anywhere near as regional as it used to be. And so I think you do need to have some sort of interest groups. But no interest group should overwhelm others, which is why I would recommend some sort of logarithmic scaling. You have to hit a certain threshold to get one candidate, and that threshold obviously changes with how many people vote. But if you get half as many votes as another interest group, then you get only one less seat, or something like that, so it's logarithmic. So if you had then the Populist Conservative Party, say, a separate party, then that would be the one to vote for, and they would help to prevent tyranny in Parliament. It wouldn't actually solve tyranny of the majority, it would just make it less likely to get a tyrannical majority. That might be a solution. That's obviously, it's an innovation, and I'm reluctant to suggest such a thing for a very traditional country. But that might do it, I'm not sure. Devolve the government is true, Libertine. It might be too far to devolve it that much down to the scale of counties, but maybe that would be better. And as I said, assuming that interests are regional has usually been safe, but it's nowhere near as safe an assumption anymore. And so I think, obviously, regional voting is better than just pure popular vote, because then the cities dominate. But regional voting itself, I don't think is actually good enough anymore. I think you've got to do something a bit more than that. I don't know what that is, but the suggestion I just made is sort of an early draft of an attempt to solve it. Libertine says, give the English Parliament limited powers like army, border controls, and international trade agreements. Make the rest, make it state or county level. Maybe, but as I said, it still doesn't really solve the problem. Because I don't think that regional voting is regional interests are that well aligned anymore. It might be better to do it that way. At the same time, Libertine, there is a lot to be said for keeping it simple. People tend to pay attention to the center of power, not to the center of their local power authority. That might be a fundamental vulnerability of confederacy, actually, of devolved powers, is people don't really pay attention to it. And so you're putting power somewhere people aren't looking. I'm not saying your idea is bad at all. I'm just theorizing. So something like that may work, but there may be downsides to it. The thing I think is so valuable about the English system is that the actual place where legislation is done is actually very simple. Each region sends one person there, and whichever group has the most people forms a government. Like, as I said, you've got the lords, you've got the monarchy, and there's all kinds of other layers, but that part is simple and easy to understand and easy to audit by the people. Keeping it simple is a very valuable thing, I think. And in the US, it's never quite that simple. You've got the House, you've got the Senate, you've got the executive, you've got the Supreme Court. Already, that's much more complicated. All four of those functions are filled out by the House of Commons here, with little bits of it being offloaded to the Lords and the monarchy, but almost none. They're almost an irrelevance. They almost shouldn't exist at all. Yeah, Tony Blair looks really evil these days, doesn't he? Perhaps it's just his true form emerging. Yeah, well, Jack, he looked good. But to be fair, Jack, when Tony Blair was advocating neoliberalism, it was fairly new still. And as I said, I don't think neoliberalism is a good idea, and all the things he did were bad, but I can understand why, from a species level, we would have wanted to experiment with those ideas. And we did, and we learned from them. Maybe some of what he did was good, I'm not sure. Possibly none of what he did was good, but at least now we know. And I think we had to go through that kind of period in order to know. It's all fixable. Guys, well, he looked fine when he was younger. I remember seeing him on TV. I don't know how he got so much more evil looking as he aged. It's weird.